of Water and the Spirit, Part 17, Chapters 23 and 24. Chapter 23, Journey into the Underworld. The egg-shaped cave was not far, but the journey was going to be steep uphill all the way. In the thick darkness of the night, I figured it would take me about a half hour to get there, but my progress became slower and slower. The terrain was unpredictable. Rocks everywhere, some hidden and painful when stepped upon, others so large they formed a natural barrier that I had to work my way around. Even when there were no large rocks, the loose gravelly ground was no help. My feet slid in search of a grip, while the mountain kept getting steeper and steeper. Soon I had to use my arms to drag myself forward safely. My thoughts went out to Nyanali and the others, who at that very moment were also progressing toward their respective caves. I wondered how hard it was for them, or if they thought about me. I heard erratic breathing, as if an animal were sniffing at something. I hid behind a rock and listened more carefully. Soon I heard noises everywhere, the sounds of hoofs and paws, panting, throats being cleared, yelping. Out of the blackness above me appeared a thin, snow-white man holding a stick and walking downhill. He was probably 2 feet tall. His long hair was thick and stood straight up all over his tiny head, as if petrified by some kind of grease. I realized that I was able to see him only because all around him there was a halo of light, bright as day. Behind him came a herd of animals of all kinds. Leading them all was a pack of porcupines, some large, some small, all walking in a loosely ordered manner. They had fierce glowing eyes and thorny bodies. Following behind the porcupines came the tiny squirrels. They ran all the time, hopping in and out of the line. Most of the other animals in the pack were unknown to me, but I recognized some of the bigger ones by their horns and the shapes of their bodies. Antelope, gazelles, buffalo, ostriches, elephants, rhinos, lions, and giraffes. The line was endless. I remembered the stories that circulated in the village about where the animals in the bush had disappeared since the introduction by the white colonials of guns and wholesale killing and hunting. I thought, so this is where they have run to they hide inside the cave as long as humans are awake and come into the open air at night to feed undisturbed. I held my breath and waited for the endless parade to end. I figured they were going to the river below. At the end of the line, there was another tiny man. This one carried a cane on his shoulders and was dressed in a beige uniform. For half a foot around him, it was day. He never noticed my presence, or if he did, it did not bother him. He walked behind an animal that looked like a horse with a wing in the middle of the back. There was no doubt that these animals had come out of the cave I was going into. I imagined it had to be extremely big to accommodate so many different species. The sniffing sound I had heard in the beginning came from an animal the size of a raccoon. Attracted by the unusual smell I was emitting, it had quit the line like a recalcitrant schoolboy and sniffed its way over to me. Now it stood on one side of the rock while I hid on the other. It inhaled deeply and, like a skilled hunter, crawled slowly toward me. My mind was moving fast. I had to design a protocol for dealing with my new companion, and I wondered whether a rock pounded heavily on its dumb head would do the job. Then I would not have to worry about food for the next day. After completing my mission, I could pick the animal up on my way back to the camp and roast it while my friends and I shared stories about our respective adventures. The stupid beast moved closer. I held both my breath and the stone, ready to exhale at the same moment. The deadly rock made a hole in the creature's head. I never got to do any of this. Instead, my hand froze in the act of bringing down the rock. Petrified, I realized that the creature I had taken for a raccoon was actually a rabbit. To my amazement, he began to speak, telling me the secret of my journey to the underworld. You still do not get it, man. After all these years, here you are again, eager to hurt me. The voice was not really coming out of the rabbit's mouth, but from some unspecifiable source. It came to me as if by an infusion from an unseen needle into the most receptive part of my being. I could neither resist the communication nor respond to it. I wondered what he meant by, after all these years. I had no clue. Our eyes were locked onto one another, his luminous, mine illumined. The rabbit had something like a hiccup that interrupted his speech every few words. You are going to visit my home now, hiccup. Yet you continue to try to kill me in yours, hiccup. My father sent me to tell you, hiccup, that he is waiting for you, hiccup. He has been chosen to be your guide, hiccup. I hope that when you come back from your visit, hiccup, we will be friends at last, hiccup. See, hiccup, when you were a kid chasing me in the bush, I tricked you into following me to my father, hiccup. I knew that wherever I ran, you would run, hiccup. You thought you found me, but it's me that found you, several hiccups. Do you still remember what my father told you? I see you don't, hiccup. It does not matter, hiccup. Ask your mother when you go home, hiccup. She still remembers that day. Your absence the whole afternoon almost scared her soul out of her body, several hiccups. She thought you had been eaten by one of us, hiccup. Ask her when you go home, and now, welcome to my father's home, hiccup. I must go join my fellows. In a flash, the rabbit was gone. I stood there immobilized by a force field, still holding the stone. After all I'd been through in the last few weeks, there was no surprise left in me. I was disappointed, though. Someone had showed up to talk to me about my journey into the cave, but just as quickly he had disappeared. When I could move again, I realized I was freezing. I had to continue walking in order to keep myself warm. The egg-shaped cave was still several hundred feet away at the top of the mountain. The way was getting so steep that I sometimes had to use my arms as much as my legs in order to stay balanced. I wondered how the mineral people had made it when they came here a few days ago. But of course, then it was day, and now it was night. The rocks offered just enough of a grip to prevent me from falling off. So I went that way, jumping from rock to rock till I reached the entrance to the magical cave. It looked like any other cave, a dwelling for bats and crawling things, and it smelled of rotting dung. Countless animals, domestic as well as savage, had defecated in it while taking a nap during the unforgiving heat of the day. The entrance was sealed by darkness and looked blacker than the night. Around it, the ground was as soft as that of a beach, as if the cave were an ocean whose shore was a resting place for dwellers of both worlds, the underworld and the one above. I remembered someone telling me, I believe it was grandfather, that the underworld people call our world the underworld too. It all depended on your point of view. Regardless of which world you are in, reaching the other always requires a downward motion. I could not endure the thought of entering the thick blackness of the cave, so I decided to light my way in. There was some straw nearby, which I gathered into a bundle, and plenty of firestones. I collected a few and struck a spark to ignite the straw. I blew on it to get it going, and, carrying my torch, I entered the cave. It felt like a womb. The floor was sandy and dusty, and I noticed with surprise that the walls were perfectly carved out of red granite. There were animal footprints everywhere. On the roof of the cave, there was a colony of bats. They screamed when I directed the light of the torch at them. Some took disorderly flight and exited the cave. The bats that remained looked at me, as if trying to figure out what could possibly have made me come here at this time of night. I could not help thinking what a great meal I could make with only a couple of bats. Like the walls of the cave, the roof, far above me, was smoothly carved. This could not be a natural geological site, I told myself. Some higher intelligence must have carefully carved it to serve the purpose for which I was sent here. The smooth, soft ground at first seemed like a playground or a resting place, but as I moved farther into the bowels of the cave, its walls became narrower and the floor less even. I was unable to continue walking, even crouched over, so I crawled. Pieces of pointed stones bit into my soft flesh like nails into butter. I continued to hold on to the burning torch. The cave was getting dangerously narrow, so cramped I could not have defended myself against crawling things, nor could I have turned around and escaped. But I could not worry about it. The space seemed custom made to fit me. My fire went out, but it was getting to be a nuisance anyway. I lay there resting and watched the sparks die. The blackness closed in. I closed my eyes in an effort to blot out images of what would happen if I had to back out. When I opened them again, I could see something that looked like a light a little distance ahead of me. At first, I imagined it was a one-eyed prehistoric animal that had taken an interest in me. Then I remembered what the rabbit had told me. The light magnetized me. It did not move or blink or twinkle. I decided to move closer. It grew bigger and bigger, and soon I realized that it was not an eye, but the sky I was seeing. I had reached the other side of the mountain. The cave must be, I thought, a tunnel that pierced straight through the mountain. I was encouraged to move forward more confidently. So this is the elders' idea of the underworld, I thought. Just another unpleasant ordeal to test my courage one last time. By now, I felt that I was beyond fear. I still had a few minor concerns, especially about my knees, which were bleeding heavily from the cuts caused by the stones. But I was confidently prepared to get the ordeal over with and to go back to the camp to report that there was no underworld anywhere in my assigned cave. On my hands and knees, I scrambled toward the exit. Writing about what came next is an extremely difficult task. What I have been able to convey so far of my experience in the underworld seems very limited, sometimes insignificant compared to what really happened. The basic problem is that whole sequences of events occurred without words, and that is what blocks the telling. When I try to describe them, I feel like I am walking barefoot on a thorny path. It was dawn when I finally crawled out of the narrow tunnel back into a world that at first looked familiar, but soon turned into something else as my body caught up with its vibration. At first, I felt an indescribable shock as I was barraged by numberless sensations. This place was so noisy, I could not resist the urge to shout, "Stop." Everything was screaming, and each shriek seemed directed at me. Soon, however, I discovered that it was I who was screaming. The sun was about to rise. The sky was so clear I knew it was going to be a sunny day. But where was I? When I asked this question in my mind, I heard it so loud in and around me that the tears rushed out of my eyes. I thought again, why am I hurting myself so badly? And instantly felt sorry for ever having thought anything in the first place. Thinking was excruciatingly painful, but I could not stop my thoughts, no matter what I did. In the meantime, I felt an immense cold envelop me, a cold so bad that I could not even shiver. Yet I could not even question this because thinking was such torture. I kept making monumental efforts to postpone mental activities, but my mind refused to cooperate. We were in the cold season of the year, but it never got like this. The tropical winter is a combination of the western fall and early summer. Temperatures become cooler during the middle of the night, but never to the point I was feeling. It was then that I realized I was in the underworld. The realization came again like a scream into my ears. It made my body shiver again, not out of cold, but out of fear, the same terror I thought I had definitively fought and overcome over the last weeks. Meanwhile, I had to do something about thinking, because thinking was torturing me beyond anything I could imagine. I felt something warm on my cheeks. When I brought my hand up to touch it, I discovered that blood was dripping out of my ears. I have to stop thinking, I said to myself, and every thought was like a sting inside my ears. I was living inside a huge loudspeaker blasting to full capacity. My survival depended upon my ability to find the wires that transmitted these sounds and cut them. But if I myself were the wires, how could I do that? I sat down, closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and held it. I do not know how long I remained without breathing. I was conscious only of the fact that the volume of the noises in and around me was beginning to dim. Slowly, the screaming receded, and with it the pain and the cold. From scream, it changed into bearable sound, then into a whisper, and finally into silence. The speech of silence is achieved when words and their potential ability to hurt meaning are done away with. Words entrap meaning, torture it, slice it into pieces the way a butcher cuts the meat of a slaughtered animal and serves it to us. The speech of silence has profound respect for the integrity of meaning as an entity separate from language. In silence, meaning is no longer heard but felt, and feeling is the best hearing, the best instrument for recording meaning. Meaning is made welcome as it is and treated with respect. Humans become meaning when they get as close to it as this. The way I felt when I had finally reached this stage cannot be described. The unresolvable conflicts that had tortured my being when I entered the realm of the underworld had been deleted, uncovering another layer of myself that collaborated better with my ability to receive meaning. That layer saved me from killing myself with the murderous knife of inner noisiness. As my mind cleared and I came out from the interior of the inner loudspeaker, I experienced a peace similar to that which I had experienced with the Green Lady and during my water journey. Peace came as a surrender, as a successful discovery of a resting place, a home. It helped me at every level of my being and was therefore more than welcome. It saved my life. I had forgotten if I was still breathing or not, but it no longer mattered. I was conscious, aware, knowing and remembering that this is the way things are and the way they should be. I was finally able to begin to explore. The underworld is not under our world and probably not above it either. It is a world all by itself. Where I was, nature was beautiful, much finer than in the world I had left behind. The abundant green and violet colors that surrounded me gave the sky a special touch. It was not blue like our sky, but of a different color. The trees were of different species too, tall and large beyond anything I had seen before, and their majesty and serenity suggested great knowledge of the world they lived in. I felt both at home and not at home. I could not sort out the part of me that was not at home, but fortunately, my critical thinking mechanism was turned off. Even though the trees hid a lot, I could see for a great distance, for I stood on a high elevation. Far in front of me were chains of strangely shaped mountains. Some looked like humans, others like animals. Though I somehow knew that each one carried great meaning, I could not decipher that meaning at this time. There was no need to. What was strange was that I remembered seeing those very shapes configured in Gisso's medicine room. They were modeled out of clay and stood as a backdrop to the animals and humans carved in wood that occupied the forefront of the medicine room. I had seen them there when we met for our first divination session. The valley below me was crowded with all types of animals grazing along the shores of a river that ran northward. I could not tell them apart from this distance. They looked like tropical animals, yet they had certain characteristics that did not correspond with the beasts in the world above. As I sat there watching them, I felt the urge to stand up and move toward them. None of them paid attention to my presence. They were all busy grazing or chasing one another or making love. It was as if I weren't there. Before walking down toward the river, I turned around to take a good look at where I had come in so that I might remember it when I needed to leave. It didn't surprise me to see neither doorway nor cave. The scene in front of me was similar to the one behind. Trees, animals, mountains, and valley without end. But somehow I was not shocked, nor critical, nor frightened. All I did was look back and forth several times to make sure that the images and landscape concorded. When I felt the urge to move downward deep within my unconscious, I obeyed it without hesitation. Chapter 24. A Mission in the Underworld. The inner compulsion I was feeling took the form of an order to proceed to the river. This urge tolerated no resistance. It did not have to, because by now I had forgotten how to resist. As I began to walk, I became aware of a feeling of weightlessness. My movements were unusually agile, and my progress seemed effortless. The clear waters of the river seemed to originate from the mountains farther south. I could not tell how deep these waters were, even though at points the river bottom was clearly visible. As I neared the shore, I stopped and gazed into the water. It occurred to me that I should be seeing my reflection, but for some reason I didn't. Because my mind was no longer busily producing thoughts, I was unable to stop questioning. Though several things were happening all around me at once, I could not give anything my attention. I knew, for example, that there was someone near me, though I could not see him. I was unable to wonder who he was or what his business was with me, nor did he bother to try to tell me. I could not remember anything linear that had happened on my way into this place, including the rabbit's message. I was fully present to what I was doing. A bird flew over to me and circled around my neck several times, so close I could have grabbed it. Then it landed on the surface of the water and floated for a while before flying off downstream. Almost immediately, I felt a pull to enter the water, and I knew something was about to happen. As I stepped into the river, I could feel that its bottom was uneven and slippery. Soon, to my surprise, I discovered that I was walking almost on top of the water, which felt warm and agreeable to the touch. The river generated a sensation of delight, and my chill body soon warmed up to match its temperature. As I reached the middle of the river, I realized that I was walking on something that was like a slightly immersed bridge. As I neared the opposite bank, I looked down and saw my right foot land between two large, staring crocodile eyes. I looked away at once and experienced a strange sinking sensation in my spine. As if it knew I was now aware of it, the crocodile moved downward, bringing the water level close to my knees. I knew beyond doubt that the strange sensation in my spine was responsible for what had occurred, yet I was not afraid. It was normal that crocodiles would team up to form a bridge for me. I had seen them come to my grandfather's funeral. The crocodile has always had a special relationship with my clan, based upon a long ago story of mutual cooperation. And after my return from the seminary, a crocodile had come to me at the river outside my village. In the real world, crocodiles are neither intelligent nor very attractive. A totem animal, however, takes its association with humans very seriously. There had to be 3 or 4 crocodiles of sizable length to cover the entire width of the river. When I finished crossing the river, I never looked back. I felt a pull to walk downstream following the riverbank, and I followed these instructions without hesitation. Everywhere birds and animals were enjoying the peaceful and serene vibration that nature gave off close to the river. None of them seemed disturbed by my presence, nor was I by theirs, though some would have been quite terrifying to me under other circumstances. There was, for example, a huge python with a hairy head that held itself up from the ground with 2 short, powerful clawed legs. As I walked close to it, it stood on guard and rolled its red eyes in their sockets. Some of the creatures I saw that day looked like animals from my world, and some were very strange. After I passed the python, I noticed a woman fish in the water, swimming downstream parallel to me and going at the same speed. I could tell she was part woman because of her braided hair and the huge pair of breasts that hung heavily below her chin. Farther ahead was a family of large monkeys that sat quietly on the beach, watching me approach. One was holding a child in her lap, the same way a human mother would. I walked past them in the same quiet manner as I had walked past the others. I do not recall how long I walked, nor how much distance I covered, but suddenly I felt as if I were being asked to leave the river and walk into the bush. As usual, I obeyed. There were scattered trees in the area I was heading toward. The grass was so tall that I could barely see any distance ahead of me as I walked. The most visible thing was the sky, which still retained the same appearance of imminent dawn that it had displayed when I first entered this realm. I did not wonder where the light came from or why the sun wasn't rising. It seemed normal to me that the underworld could do without direct sunlight, and that nature would prosper anyway. I became aware that I was sweating, though I did not feel hot. I decided I must have been walking for a long time. The grass and the trees began to get shorter and shorter, as if I were entering the savanna region of the underworld. All around me were she trees, just as they appeared in the outside world. I continued my progress unconcerned. Finally, I saw a tree that distinguished itself from the others by its unusual size. Tall and heavily branched, with large shining leaves, it held night inside its foliage. Under its vast canopy, smaller trees of diverse nature were grouped according to species, as if by special design. As I came closer, I noticed that they formed a circle around the big tree, as if parading underneath it. I walked straight to the trunk of the large tree, making my way through the smaller ones. The big tree was elevated on huge branching roots. They reminded any who approached that the tree had the same silhouette below the ground as it had above. I counted 6 large roots reaching into the ground, and the same number of large branches some 15 meters above. The trunk of the tree was covered with a gelatinous substance that reminded me of the fluid that covered the boy who had died after returning through the door of light. It never occurred to me to touch it. Under the roots of the tree was a bluish-violet stone that glowed as I looked at it. It had a very bright center whose light increased and decreased, making the stone seem as if it were breathing. I had never seen its like before. Were it not for its glow and its strange color, I would have taken it as a white firestone. It was small enough to be easily grasped in my hand, and I suddenly felt the compulsion to do so. The roots of the tree seemed to form a shield around the stone. To reach the stone, I had to kneel and lean my body at an almost perpendicular angle to the opening between a pair of roots. As I grasped the stone and brought it out through the opening in the roots, it began to glow fiercely. I felt my body growing colder and colder. The stone felt like an ice cube. It stuck to my hand as if some force were holding it there from inside of me. When I stood up and opened my hand, it would not fall off, but clung there, stinging me. Against my will, I closed my fingers around it. My hand was shaking, and so was my whole body. Just as I could not stop holding the stone, I could not stop looking at it. My eyes began to tear in reaction to the luminosity that was getting far too high for the naked eye. It was like a battle. I wanted to get rid of the stone, and the stone would not let go of me. I tried prying it off my palm with the help of my other hand. It too became stuck. It was then that I realized that I was on my own to solve this problem, just as I had been when I had first entered this realm and encountered the unbearable noise level. My hand had taken on a violet color as if the irradiation of the stone were infectious. The violet glow spread slowly from my palm to my fingers. It was so powerful that I could clearly see it shining through the back of the hand stuck on top of it. The cold I was experiencing was similar to the cold I had felt earlier, only now it was more ferocious. The warm tears pouring out of my eyes quickly froze, blurring my vision. First, it felt as if I were looking through a glass window that grew fatter and fatter from the inside, until I seemed to be looking at the world from the inside of a huge crystal house. In the meantime, the violet infection that had begun in my hand was spreading irremediably. Like a statue, I watched the gradual icing of myself occur from my hands to my arms and outward to the